I took my wife to a party, but she left with another man because he was rich. He threw me a dollar bill and said, "I'll take good care of her tonight." The next day, my unfaithful wife discovered that her key no longer fit the door, and her lover called her and shouted, "You didn't tell me that your husband—" Before I reveal just who I am, let me set the scene. My name is Caleb Shaw, but people call me Cal. I'm 47, and my life is built on things that are solid and real. At my workshop, Shaw Woodcraft Designs, I turn massive slabs of Oregon timber into furniture, live edge tables, and unique pieces from reclaimed wood that will outlive us all. My hands are stained with varnish, and the scent of sawdust is my cologne. It's a good life, a life of substance. I paid off my mortgage early, and I'm raising 4 great kids who are the only part of my marriage that turned out exactly right. My wife, Genevieve, soon to be ex-wife, I'm learning to say exists in a different universe. She's the director of an elite art gallery downtown, a world of sterile white walls, champagne, and people who buy things instead of making them. She's beautiful and has ambition pouring out of her pores, but she sees my craft as just manual labor. For years, I thought we balanced each other out. I was the craftsman who kept things grounded. She was the socialite who kept us classy. I built things meant to last for generations. She built a network of wealthy clients. I was the substance. She was the style. Turns out, I was just the foundation she was embarrassed to stand on. That's why, for the last 5 years, I was her plus none at all, her fancy gallery events and award dinners. She said I didn't fit the culture, that I made her patrons uncomfortable because I asked what they actually did for a living. So I stayed home, worked in my shop, and told myself it was normal. Until last Tuesday, she walked into my workshop, my sanctuary, and said something that felt heavier than a slab of oak. "You have to come to the gallery's winter benefit this year. Not, I'd like you to come, but have to, like I was a prop she needed to complete a scene. That wasn't an invitation. It was a red flag the size of a redwood, and I should have known right then that something was about to burn. Your day." The benefit was at the Hawthorne Contemporary Arts Center, a place so white and sterile it felt less like a gallery and more like an expensive laboratory. I stood there in my funeral suit, feeling like a lumberjack at a vegan convention. Genevieve, however, was in her element. She wore a black dress that was more of a suggestion than an item of clothing, gliding through rooms filled with abstract sculptures and people murmuring about market trends. She transformed instantly, her laughter a little too loud, her touch on people's arms a little too familiar. When she introduced me, it was always the same dismissive line, "This is my husband, Cal. He makes furniture." She'd say it with a tight smile before quickly steering the conversation back to art installations, leaving me standing there like a hand-carved coat rack. I was an embarrassing fact she had to acknowledge but not dwell on. I was nursing my second overpriced whiskey, seriously contemplating faking a medical emergency when he materialized. Preston Vance. He was the gallery's biggest patron, a wealthy art collector who looked like he'd been assembled in a factory that specializes in creating smug, punchable faces. His suit was perfect. His hair was perfect. And he carried himself with the effortless confidence of a man who has never once had to fix something himself. The moment Genevieve saw him, her entire face changed. She lit up brighter than our Christmas tree, her eyes sparkling in a way they definitely hadn't for me in a long, long time. Their conversation was a flurry of inside jokes and whispered comments about artists and acquisitions. He barely glanced at me, shaking my hand with a limp grip and a condescending, the craftsman. They spoke of late nights curating the new collection, and my gut clenched. The alarm bells weren't just ringing, they were screaming. I was just a piece of the scenery, and I knew in that moment that this carefully staged evening was about to fall apart. Then it happened. Is backed. The moment replayed in my head 1,000 times. With a smug smile, Preston Vance reached into his wallet, flicked a single-dollar bill across the table, and said, "Don't worry, champ. I'll take good care of her tonight." The table erupted in laughter. Genevieve's friends, these people I'd never met, laughed like it was the joke of the year. My wife had the decency to look embarrassed for half a second before she joined in, her laughter a blade in my gut. The dollar sat there, a crumpled insult, a physical valuation of what this man thought I was worth. My mind was screaming, but my hands were steady. I picked up the dollar, folded it neatly, and looked Preston dead in the eye. "Thanks," I said, my voice calm and cold. "That's the down payment for your upcoming hospital bills." The laughter died instantly. I stood, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the ballroom before I did something that would cost more than my pride. Instead of leaving, I stepped onto the outdoor terrace to get some air. A limo driver stood smoking by the rail, looking as out of place as I felt. I borrowed his lighter, and we shared a moment of silence. Two working men on the outside looking in. From there, I had a perfect view of the entrance below. Minutes later, Genevieve, Preston, and their friends emerged, roaring with laughter. She never once glanced back, never looked for me. They all piled into a black Escalade that was waiting for them, and the car purred away into the night. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I drove home not wondering, but knowing. The dollar bill in my pocket felt like a lead weight. Later, at 4 a.m., my phone buzzed with a bank notification. A $387 charge for a suite at the hotel. It wasn't a surprise. It was just the receipt for a crime I had already witnessed with my own eyes. I took a screenshot of the charge and saved it. Divorce court loves documentation. At dawn, I heard the purr of Genevieve's white BMW in the driveway. I watched from my workshop as she crept into the house like a teenager sneaking in past curfew, thinking maybe I hadn't noticed. I gave her 10 minutes before walking into the kitchen. She was standing by the coffee maker in yesterday's makeup and a man's suit jacket, an expensive one, with the initials PV embroidered on the pocket. "You're up early," she said, her voice a guilty squeak. "Never went to sleep," I said, my own voice flat and dead. "Where were you?" She launched into a flimsy story about the party running late, about crashing on a colleague's couch. "Preston lent me this. It got cold," she explained, gesturing to the jacket as if it were proof of innocence instead of guilt. Then I saw it, just above the collar, a purple-red mark that had exactly one cause and zero innocent explanations. A goddamn hickey. Her hand flew to her neck as she stammered some pathetic lie about a curling iron. A lie so insulting it was worse than the truth. But the final blow wasn't the lie itself. It was how she immediately tried to act normal, turning away to make coffee, humming some pop song, and asking what we should do for dinner. She was pretending our marriage wasn't bleeding out on the kitchen floor. That's when the last thread of our life together snapped. Not with a bang, but a quiet, final break. I was done being worth $1, done being the embarrassing husband, done pretending this was salvageable. The next morning, I was at the hardware store at 6 a.m. There's something deeply American about solving your problems there. Marriage falling apart? There's a product for that. Aisle 7, right next to the deadbolts. My mission was to buy locks so strong they could keep out the apocalypse. And a cheating spouse. I grabbed 4 of them. This isn't presented. Installing new locks when you're angry is oddly satisfying. It's a cathartic act, methodically replacing the old hardware that welcomed her in with shiny new barriers that would keep her out. Keys she didn't have. Keys she would never get. My oldest son, Noah, found me at the back door. He's 18 and smart enough to know this wasn't just a home improvement project. "Dad, why are you changing all the locks?" he asked. "Home security upgrade," I said without looking up. "Making sure only the people who live here can get in." He was quiet for a moment. "Does Mom know about this upgrade?" "She's about to find out." "That's cold, Dad," he said, but it sounded more like he was impressed than concerned. He helped me with the last 2 doors, a silent partner in my quiet rebellion. By noon, the house was a fortress. Genevieve had left for yoga, still trying to maintain the illusion of a normal Sunday. I sat in the living room with a beer and a book I wasn't reading, waiting. At 6:30, her BMW pulled into the driveway. I heard her footsteps, the jingle of keys, then the scrape of metal as her key met a lock that no longer recognized her authority. Silence. Another, harder try. Then she yelled my name. "Cal!" I let her yell twice more before I opened the door. She stood there in her yoga pants, her face a mix of confusion and fury. "The key isn't working," she said. "Yeah," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Neither is our marriage." Her jaw dropped. "What? Cal, that's not let me in. We need to have an adult conversation." "An adult conversation?" I repeated. "That's rich. Coming from someone who spent last night in a hotel room and came home wearing another man's jacket. That's real mature behavior, Genevieve. Ease rime." Her voice climbed, losing control of the narrative. "I told you, we were just—" "Go talk to Preston," I interrupted, feeling calmer than I had in days. "The guy who thinks I'm worth $1. The guy whose initials are on the jacket you wore home. I'm sure he'd love to have an adult conversation with you." She tried to push past me, but I didn't budge. That's when the neighbors started appearing, suddenly finding urgent yard work to do in the fading light. Genevieve noticed her audience and lowered her voice. "You're being unreasonable. We need to talk about communication." "Communication?" I said, loud enough for the whole block to hear. "Communication ended when you turned our marriage into a group project. When you added a third person without my consent. That's not a marriage. That's a committee, and I'm resigning." Her face went blank. She fumbled for her phone and stormed to her car, peeling out of the driveway. I waved to the neighbors and went inside. The house felt quiet, peaceful. I realized then that silence sounded better than my wife's presence, and that was the saddest, most freeing thought I'd had in years. An hour later, Noah came downstairs. "Mom called me," he said. "She says you're overreacting, that you embarrassed her and are making a big deal out of nothing." Did she mention the nothing she was doing in a hotel room? Noah held up a hand. "Dad, I'm just telling you what she said. She wanted me to convince you to let her back in." He paused, then grinned. "I didn't say I'd try very hard. I couldn't help but laugh. You're a good kid." "I'm 18, Dad. I'm old enough to know when someone's bullshitting. We've all seen how she's treated you for years. Like you're an accessory she's embarrassed of. Like what you do isn't a real job. It's been gross to watch." That hit me harder than the affair itself. I thought I'd hidden it better. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Then it rang. I let it go to voicemail. The real fight was just beginning. You was doing with Baud. The next morning, the war began officially, with a thick manila envelope from a law firm. It was 3 pages of legalese that boiled down to one thing. Genevieve wanted half of everything. Spousal support, the house, and the part that made my blood boil, half of Shaw Woodcraft Designs, the business she'd always called my little hobby. The hypocrisy was staggering. I immediately called my attorney, Marcus Thorne. He's expensive, but he enjoys a good fight the way I enjoy the grain of a perfect piece of maple. "Marcus," I said, "business is fine. Marriage is dead. I need you to kill it officially before I get murdered in the process." There was a pause, then a dry chuckle. "Finally, I was wondering when you'd call. My wife saw Genevieve out with some guy a few weeks ago. We figured it was a matter of time." He laughed when I told him she wanted half the business. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the sound of a shark smelling blood. His instructions were simple. Bring every financial document I had and stop all contact with her. "We're going to destroy her," he said. Legally and ethically, of course. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, I walked into his downtown office with a box containing my entire financial life. Sitting next to him was a woman named Evelyn Reed. She was a forensic accountant who looked like she could find a missing dollar in a hurricane. "Mr. Shaw," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip, "I'm very good at finding where money goes when people think no one is looking." I unpacked my box of documents onto the polished conference table. Evelyn's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. The hunt had begun. In Wystan. "Marcus mentioned the hotel charge," Evelyn said, her fingers flying across her laptop. "What card was it on?" "Our joint business, Amex," I said. "For client entertainment." Evelyn's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "Oh, this is going to be good," she murmured. It didn't take her 20 minutes. She turned her laptop around, showing me a spreadsheet that made my stomach drop. "Your wife has been very busy with your money, Cal. In the last 6 months alone, she's charged over $40,000 to your business account. Hotels, spas, expensive dinners. This isn't client entertainment. This is an affair funded by your company." Rage and a strange sense of vindication fought for dominance in my chest. "Can we use this?" I asked Marcus. "Oh, we're going to use the hell out of this," he said, grinning. "This destroys her claim for spousal support." "And it gets worse," Evelyn added, pointing to another screen. "She's been transferring money from your joint account to an LLC, registered to one Preston Vance." Genevieve hadn't just cheated on me. She'd been systematically looting our finances to fund her affair with a man who was, in turn, putting that money into his own shell company. The audacity was almost impressive. Then Marcus looked at me with a strange expression. "Cal, I need to ask you something. What's the full name of your business? Any subsidiaries?" "Shaw Woodcraft Designs is the main company," I said. "But years ago, I invested the profits into a business that imports and exports rare and exotic lumber. It runs itself. It's called Viridian Woods International." Marcus started to laugh. Not a chuckle, but a full-blown, throw-your-head-back laugh. No way. I was confused until my brain finally caught up. Preston Vance, the wealthy art collector and patron. What was his day job? "He's the director of acquisitions at Viridian Woods," I said, the words feeling alien in my mouth. The man who'd thrown $1 at me was on my payroll. Marcus was wiping tears from his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, still laughing, "pull up Viridian's employee roster. I think Mr. Shaw needs to schedule a performance review." The guy who threw $1 at his boss. The guy sleeping with my wife, funding his lifestyle with my money, smirking at me like I was beneath him. That guy cashed a paycheck I signed every 2 weeks. My laughter could have registered on the Richter scale. It started as a chuckle and built into a roar that had Marcus and Evelyn staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "This is going to be so goddamn beautiful," I finally managed to say. Marcus was already making notes, his eyes gleaming. "Cal, my friend," he said, "we're not just winning this divorce. We're going to make legal history." The following Tuesday, I walked into the sleek, modern offices of Viridian Woods International. My assistant, Diane, who has the uncanny ability to know what I need before I do, had my coffee ready. "You've got that look," she said. "What look?" "The one that says someone's about to have a very bad day, and you're going to enjoy it." "Diane," I said, taking the coffee, "schedule a mandatory meeting for all division heads. 10 o'clock sharp, conference room A, and pull Preston Vance's personnel file. Everything." She just smiled. About damn time. By 9:45, I was at the head of the conference table, the infamous dollar bill in my pocket. The division heads filtered in, all looking nervous. At precisely 10, Preston Vance walked in, carrying an expensive leather portfolio, the picture of untouchable confidence. Then he saw me. The color drained from his face as his brain tried to compute how the blue-collar husband from the gallery was sitting in the owner's chair. He sank into his seat, his hands trembling slightly. "Morning, everyone," I said, my voice casual. I looked directly at him, a smile playing on my lips that didn't reach my eyes. "Morning, Preston. Heard you had an interesting night last Friday. How's Genevieve?" The room went so quiet, you could hear a pin drop on the expensive carpet. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded dollar bill, and slid it across the polished conference table. It spun to a stop right in front of Preston's portfolio. "I believe this belongs to you." He stared at it like it was a live grenade. The silence in the room was absolute. I don't," he stammered. "Let me help you out," I said, leaning back in my chair. "That's the dollar you threw at me, your boss, while making a joke about taking care of my wife? Remember now? You thought I was just what? Some carpenter you could insult?" The HR director made a sound like her soul was leaving her body. Preston, sweating through his expensive suit, tried to explain, but I cut him off. "I'm not interested in explanations. I am interested in professional conduct. You're fired, effective immediately. Conduct unbecoming of an executive. Security will escort you out. And if you even think about wrongful termination, my lawyers are eager to discuss your relationship with my wife and your misuse of company time in open court." I felt nothing but a cold, clean satisfaction as 2 security guards led him away. The meeting was over. The real fallout came 3 hours later. A panicked voicemail from Preston to Genevieve was somehow forwarded to my phone. "You didn't tell me your husband owns the company," he shrieked. "You said he was just some carpenter. I just got fired, Genevieve, because of you. Because you couldn't be bothered to mention that your husband signs my paychecks." It was music to my ears. The following week was a masterclass in watching a life unravel. Genevieve tried calling me dozens of times, leaving messages that cycled from apologetic to furious. I never answered. She tried using the kids as messengers, but they shut her down. Noah told her to stop putting them in the middle, and the twins were even less diplomatic. Defeated, she moved in with her sister, no doubt playing the victim over glasses of expensive Chardonnay while her carefully constructed world burned to the ground. It's in. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded dollar bill, and slid it across the polished conference table. It spun to a stop right in front of Preston's portfolio. "I believe this belongs to you." He stared at it like it was a live grenade. The silence in the room was absolute. I don't," he stammered. "Let me help you out," I said, leaning back in my chair. "That's the dollar you threw at me, your boss, while making a joke about taking care of my wife. Remember now? You thought I was just what? Some carpenter you could insult?" The HR director made a sound like her soul was leaving her body. Preston, sweating through his expensive suit, tried to explain, but I cut him off. "I'm not interested in explanations. I am interested in professional conduct. You're fired, effective immediately. Conduct unbecoming of an executive. Security will escort you out. And if you even think about wrongful termination, my lawyers are eager to discuss your relationship with my wife and your misuse of company time in open court." I felt nothing but a cold, clean satisfaction as 2 security guards led him away. The meeting was over. The real fallout came 3 hours later. A panicked voicemail from Preston to Genevieve was somehow forwarded to my phone. "You didn't tell me your husband owns the company," he shrieked. "You said he was just some carpenter. I just got fired, Genevieve, because of you. Because you couldn't be bothered to mention that your husband signs my paychecks." It was music to my ears. The following week was a masterclass in watching a life unravel. Genevieve tried calling me dozens of times, leaving messages that cycled from apologetic to furious. I never answered. She tried using the kids as messengers, but they shut her down. Noah told her to stop putting them in the middle, and the twins were even less diplomatic. Defeated, She moved in with her sister, no doubt playing the victim over glasses of expensive Chardonnay, while her carefully constructed world burned to the ground. To Kate, Marcus Thorne kept me updated. Genevieve's lawyer was painting me as a controlling, vindictive monster, and her as the neglected wife who made one little mistake. It was a standard, pathetic playbook. Let them try, I told Marcus. We've got the receipts. Oh, we've got more than that now, he said, grinning. Evelyn found 3 hidden bank accounts. Genevieve has been siphoning money for over a year. The total is closer to 70 grand. The day of the hearing, I was calm. I'd moved past anger into something colder, more focused. Genevieve sat across the courtroom, dressed in a conservative navy dress, playing the role of the wronged wife to perfection. Her lawyer delivered a dramatic performance, portraying me as a tyrant who destroyed her life over a simple misunderstanding. When the judge asked me to respond, I kept my voice level. Your Honor, my wife humiliated herself when she spent the night in a hotel with another man and came home wearing his jacket. I didn't create the humiliation. I just provided better lighting by refusing to pretend it wasn't happening. And Mr. Vance wasn't fired out of spite. He was fired for sexually harassing the wife of his employer at a company function. That's when Marcus stood up with our folder of doom. He laid out the bank statements, the hotel invoices, the transfer records. The judge's expression went from neutral to annoyed as she read. Mrs. Shaw, the judge said, looking up. Can you explain why you charged over $40,000 to your husband's business account for personal expenses, including multiple hotel stays and transfers to an LLC owned by a Mr. Preston Vance? Genevieve froze, looking at her lawyer in panic. But the judge wasn't finished. Mrs. Shaw, were you aware that Mr. Vance was an employee of a company owned entirely by your husband? Dead silence. She stared at her hands, her silence a confession that sealed her fate. Dollars. Genevieve's lawyer tried to argue for spousal support, but the judge cut him off. Counselor, your client stole $70,000 from the marital estate to fund an extramarital affair. She will not be rewarded for that behavior. Here is my ruling. What followed was the most beautiful 15 minutes of my life. I was awarded the house, full ownership. I was awarded both of my businesses, Shaw Woodcraft Designs and Viridian Woods, free and clear. I got full custody of the kids. Genevieve was ordered to repay the $70,000 she stole, plus all legal fees. As for assets, Mrs. Shaw will retain, the judge said, squinting at a paper with barely concealed amusement. She'll keep her personal belongings, her yoga mat, and a 2008 Toyota Corolla that Mr. Shaw indicates he was planning to donate to charity. My son Ethan's laughter echoed through the courtroom. I didn't even try to hide my smile. Genevieve just sat there, her carefully constructed victimhood shattered, tears ruining her makeup. Outside, Ethan gave me a high five. Dad, that was better than any movie I've ever seen. Iswaks, my phone buzzed. A text from my daughter Maya. Mom's crying to Aunt Denise about having to drive the Corolla. Best day ever. News about a Portland craftsman who legally destroyed his cheating wife and her corporate boyfriend spread like wildfire. A few days later, a barista at my local coffee shop leaned in and whispered, "Hey, you're the woodworker guy, right? The one with the dollar bill?" Dude, legend. My story had gone viral in the artisan and design communities. Someone made a meme, a photo of me in my workshop with the caption, "Respect the craftsman. He might own the company that sells you your materials." My business phone started ringing off the hook. Designers, architects, and wealthy homeowners all wanted a piece from Shaw Woodcraft. My order backlog went from 2 months to over a year. The irony was delicious. Genevieve was always embarrassed by my blue-collar work. Now, that very work was being celebrated, and I was more successful than ever. It was in my workshop at 2 a.m. that the idea hit me. I could turn this entire disaster into something tangible, something that celebrated integrity, a new line of furniture, a statement. Out of rad, the next morning, I called my son Ethan into my workshop. He's sharp and has a real talent for marketing. I've got an idea, I said, showing him my sketches. A new premium line, the Legacy Collection. What makes it different? He asked. Each piece gets a small, custom metal plaque, I explained, pointing to the design. On it were the words, crafted to endure, unlike trust. Ethan burst out laughing. That's savage, Dad. I love it. He created a marketing campaign around craftsmanship and integrity, and the subtext did all the heavy lifting. The Legacy Collection sold out before we even finished the first piece. We had a waiting list, a year long. My kids found their own ways to process everything. Liam, my 15-year-old, took up boxing. Olivia, his twin, threw herself into environmental activism. But it was my youngest, 12-year-old Sophie, who was hit the hardest. One afternoon, she found me in the workshop after a therapy session. My therapist says I should tell you how I feel, she said quietly. I'm sad about Mom, but I'm proud of you. Proud of me? Yeah, she said, her eyes serious. She said you stayed calm. You protected us and didn't make us choose sides. She said not all dads do that. Something in my chest cracked open. That was the only victory that ever truly mattered. 6 months later, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Genevieve was working at a smaller gallery, living in a generic apartment complex, and driving that old Corolla. Preston had reportedly fled to California, selling something tacky to tourists. As for me, my business was thriving. One evening, Ethan joined me on the deck overlooking the Oregon forest. You handled all that like a pro, Dad, he said. I grinned. Son, sometimes you don't have to fight fire with fire. You just let idiots light the match themselves and stand back to enjoy the show. That dollar bill is framed in my office now. Right below it is a plaque I made myself, with my new company motto, respect the man with sawdust on his hands. He probably owns the company.